Hi, my name is Brandon Rayner, and I play trombone in the rock band Ruin the Night. We're recording this on the 4th of July, 2020, the day that America celebrates her independence. It's a day we look back upon our founding fathers and give thanks for not having to be ruled by a king. Here's to hoping that holds up, now and forever. Now, I learn much about history the same way you do, I'm sure, from the TV. And with yesterday being no different, I picked up some knowledge centered around one founding father in particular, Alexander Hamilton. Yesterday was the big release of the acclaimed Broadway play's filmed version on Disney Plus. And if you were one of the few like me who didn't make it to New York City with $849 in your pocket for a front row seat, have no fear, Disney's here. What stood out for me is how the battles of the American Revolution, legislation, etc. are practically just footnotes in the story. Hamilton never strays from its central theme, survival, the struggle of continuing on after a major goal is reached, after you've made a mistake, after you've lost a loved one. Knowing when to not throw away your shot, and always having the ability to draft a neutrality proclamation when one is needed. I'm here today with a man not known for his neutrality, and I mean that in the best way possible. You will always know where he stands, and that is a trait I admire and aspire to possess as well. His knowledge learned from both books and experience alike, and maybe a little TV, has made him into one of the smartest people I have the pleasure of knowing. Dr. Dan McCool, thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me, Brandon, and thanks for doing all these interviews. It's a great series.
Oh, great. Well, I mean, thank you for, promoting them.
Well, thank you for, saying thank you.
I talked about Hamilton a little bit. What's your go-to 4th of July themed movie or series?
Oh man, I'm glad you asked that. There's a scene in the John Adams HBO series, which has a lot of crossover with Hamilton, when John Adams stands up the night before they sign the Declaration of Independence, and he gives this great speech, and he talks about the kind of blood and toil that it's going to require to beat the British in the war if they actually go forward with it. And it's this kind of over dramatized scene where he rallies the Continental Congress to vote for the Declaration. And I always thought that if I was ever to do any acting, I would use that scene as a monologue. And I post it every year. I used to show it in all these classes, and I can do it by heart. But it's a great scene. It's Paul Giamatti playing John Adams, and I'd highly recommend that series.
Yeah, we were talking about country's heritage. I wanted to talk a little bit about your heritage too. Your name is McCool. Most people don't believe you at first, right? When you tell them that's your name, most people you first meet.
People don't believe it, though. No, people are like, that's fake. Because there's not a lot of McCools up in New England. My brother found some great newspaper clippings from these McCools who were like a rowdy bunch, when they came over and settled around the Blackstones, right on the border of Rhode Island. And there's like newspaper clippings of them having to go to court for all sorts of mischief. And so that that tomfoolery kind of runs in our blood, I think.
Our friendship spans some 25 years, Dan. Your trumpet and my trombone have always been the common thread. Can you talk a bit about what the trumpet means to you?
Well, the trumpet is a beautiful instrument. It's like a little weapon, it's like the size of a gun. It's the loudest, I believe it's the loudest instrument. I think I read that a few years ago. It's the loudest non-electrified, amplified instrument that there is. It's cool. And then you kind of balance out like the fingerings with what you're doing with your lips and what you're doing with your breath.
Yeah, I just see your face, and it hasn't moved in like.
I gotta change my setting. I gotta change my setting. I'm gonna go inside.
All right.
This is stupid trying to do this. Here. Hold on a second.
All right.
I got it. I got you.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Cool.
Yeah.
I can hear great.
Okie dokie.
You look good.
Thanks. Do I look? Yeah. I feel all right. Thank you.
So we played music together up until 2002 when we went our separate ways. You told me recently that it was you made like a conscious decision to kind of read every book and learn everything there was to know about political science, ultimately earning your doctorate and publishing a book on the subject entitled 3 Frames of Modern Politics, Self, Others, and Institutions. Can you talk a bit about the transition from music to study?
I had a professor at Massasoit Community College in Brockton, which is where I failed out of it when I was in the band. Failed out of college, and then I went back after the band, and I had a professor named Tim Trask, who was this, he's a Vietnam vet, who was, against the war, and his life was saved by Henry David Thoreau. Like, he was in Vietnam at some, Air Force base or something during the war, and he found a copy of Thoreau's Maine Woods, and he always said it saved his life. So that's around the time that the band ended, I was sort of going through a little bit of an identity crisis, I guess, and so I picked that up too. I started reading about Thoreau and reading about the Transcendentalists and what they thought about war and slavery and all those sorts of things, and I think that's what originally brought me into politics, and then just like the studying power and power relationships and what that has, how that relates to morality, personal morality, and things like that. So that's kind of what got me into it.
What was like the underlying motivating factor for you when you became kind of like a sole individual as opposed to a member of a band?
Whenever I do a big change in my life, I tend to do it radically. Like, I just go in the complete opposite direction I was in before. So, I think for me, that's kind of what it was. It was like, you want to wipe the slate clean and start over again. And I think I've had like 3 or 4 of those in my life, and that happened to be one of them. So it was like, always surrounded by people, surrounded by, people singing, bodies, like just very physical, right?
Right.
And then like,
Yeah.
and then when you go into, you kind of go back into the lab. I went into kind of like a cave for many years and just studied all the, philosophy and spirituality and everything. And that was just going the complete opposite direction. So it's kind of like this like slate clearing thing for me. That's kind of, for whatever reason, I think I do that every 5 or 6 or 7 years or something.
Let's talk. Let's go a little bit about to Blue Revolution, and that was another thing well, for people who don't know, it's a Facebook group surpassed what, 60,000 members. What was the pivotal moment for you to kind of start this, to start Blue Rev?
Well, I mean, it was Trump getting elected. Me and a group of 50 friends who were just going to like vent and share, pictures and protests and rants and raves and information and stuff. And then it's sort of people added their friends and they added their friends and they added their friends. And I was teaching as a visiting professor here, which doesn't pay much. So I was Ubering on the side. And so this became like my gig, is to run this community of progressives who were concerned about the country. And then eventually it got to sort of the tipping point where I was like, oh, I could probably do this full time, actually, with the amount of stuff we do, the enthusiasm of the people, their willingness to help out with the costs of running this, the labor costs of doing this and everything. So, but, so it kind of took on a life of its own after a while.
You've always been kind of an organizer. Like, how were some of the skills developed in your early like punk rock days? Like, can you talk about what you would do to organize things for your bands back when you were just a minor?
Yeah, well, it's funny, like someone asked me recently, like, what's the thing that makes you happy? And it's always been like a tough answer for me, because I'm like, I don't really know, but it kind of dawned on me recently that it's putting a bunch of people in a room. And like, I've been doing that probably since I was like 13, and we set up all kinds of shows.
All these shows were happening in Boston. We didn't have a chance of being invited to play in Boston, being from the suburbs. So, again, being motivated like you are, you're like, oh, let's just do it ourselves, like.
And like you said, Brandon, like you kind of nailed it. I mean, we weren't getting invited to play shows in Boston. So we were like, screw it. We'll play shows at the VFW down the street. And it's just a like, you walk in, you meet some old veteran, and you're like, hey, can we rent out your hall for $150? We'll get a detail cop. And they show up, and 90% of the time it was fine, but then you get kids smoking pot in the bathroom, or whatever, bringing booze or whatever, and it would get a little out of control. But for the most part, it was like, yeah, it was community building. I mean, it was obviously some of the fondest memories of my life. And
We have to talk about COVID-19. We're living in New England where we've been spared largely of any rising statistic right now. How are you balancing good news locally with bad news nationally?
I've tried to keep my attention locally. Massachusetts has done a brilliant job, I think. I live in the Somerville, Cambridge area, so my mayor has been great on this. Every time I go out, I've got this thing ready to go. Whenever I walk outside my door, I got the mask going. The governor of Massachusetts has been fantastic, in my opinion, on this. And so I try to stay local with it, and it's, I like you and everyone in the band and really everyone in general wants to get out of this and go back to some sort of normal life. I mean, like I said to you before, the thing that makes me happy in life is putting people in a room.
So we have some good news with Ruin the Night this Monday. Uh, Duggan and Dave and I are going to go in and record drum tracks for some of the couple of the songs. Still do it carefully, like you said, where we're going to be wearing masks and everything. But I'm excited about it. I'm excited about Ruin the Night. We're playing horns again. The horn section's back. Like this is pretty cool. Huh? How do you remember it coming back, coming to be?
I'm not surprised that we ended up all playing in a band together, to be quite honest. I mean, I just remember it coming together pretty organically. And, I think Duggan invited me to play music, at their practice space in Alston there. And I think it was like maybe the second week I was like, oh, I can't make it, whatever. I don't really know what this thing is. And he was bummed out. He's like, oh, I had a surprise for you and everything. I was like, you don't have a surprise for me. You're just trying to make me feel bad. And then but then I showed up the third week and you were there, and I was like, of course we're doing this. Yeah, no, this is great. It's one of those things that just kind of seemed to make sense. Like we're all in the same area again. We're all at a particular stage in our lives where we're, looking to not take over the world like we were 15, 20 years ago. I don't think that level of it is still there, but it's we're trying to take over our own world in a way, and just kind of whittle it down and have something that makes us happy and creative and thinking and moving and continuing to exercise that muscle, that musical muscle. It's like I run this organization. I try to sort of keep like a pretty vibrant social life, and I like to put on events and things like that, which I do with Blue Revolution. But then like playing trumpet in a band is like, man, that's like a cherry on top. I mean, for me, it's just gravy. Or a cherry or whatever.
Not cherry on top of the gravy.
You can put gravy on top of the cherry, whatever. You can get wet. Yucky.
That is yuck.
But no, I think for me, it just kind of like completes the puzzle for me. I mean, that's kind of my best way to put it. And then
I agree.
We have a blast to practice. We have a blast even on Zoom when we do these meetings. It's just everyone brings their own part to it. It just fits in. It all fits in well. That's the part for me that I like. It's like I had someone, a kind of mentor a few years ago, say to me, just, lower the stakes, turn the temperature down. It's like, you're going to be fine if this thing doesn't take over the world. And it just kind of hits you one day. You're like, oh yeah, that's true. Like it's so obvious, but it's so true. I'd be very sad if the band wasn't around, but it's just like trying to find that middle ground between like, dedication and the work that we do on it versus like what we get out of it. And it's like, I just love the camaraderie, the music. It doesn't need to be this thing that the River City Rebels, we were just always trying to shoot for the stars, and that's fitting for a 19-year-old kid, but as someone in their late 30s, early 40s, that'll give you a heart attack, so It's just, lowering the temperature. Wasn't that your name? You were Heart Attack Brandon. Wasn't that your name?
I think it was. I think. Yeah, I think so.
I like Cocoa Bone better. I forget who came up with that. That was your latest one. You haven't had a nickname like that in 20 years.
Yeah. It's great. Can't wait for it to just take over the world. But no, I'm so happy that we're friends again, and we're bandmates again, and it's great. And Dan, thanks for sitting down with me and doing this, and I love you, buddy, and I can't wait to see you in person again.
Well, I love you too, Brandon, and I'm very proud of you for doing these. These are great interviews. These are really fun to watch and get to know each other as we're kind of sitting in separate places. These are great.
All right.
All right, dude. See ya.
Bye.
Bye, Lily. Bye.
Bye. Say bye.
I can't